February the 28th, 1945. Oranienburg, north of Berlin. Snow drifts between skeletal hangars as American reconnaissance pilots sweep over what's left of the Luftwaffe's once proud airfields. Below, under camouflage nets and the rubble of collapsed roofs, something catches their eye, a curve of metal too smooth, too deliberate, too alien to belong among wrecked Messerschmitts and Heinkels. Inside Hangar 13, two brothers stand before their creation. Reimar and Walter Horten, both aviators, both dreamers, run their gloved hands along the matte grey skin of the Ho 229 V3, the world's first jet-powered flying wing. Its nose tapers like a blade. There is no tail, no vertical stabilizer, only the wide, seamless arc of a wing that seems grown, not built. Reimar, the younger and more mathematical of the two, checks the twin junkers, Jumo 004B engines, embedded deep within the body. "It breathes like an animal," he murmurs. Walter, the older, the pilot, smiles thinly. He has flown gliders since boyhood. For him, shape and air are a religion. Then let's see if the animal lives. The air outside crackles with the fading thunder of Soviet artillery. The Reich is collapsing. But here, on this cold airstrip, the brothers cling to their vision of the future, a plane that needs no fuselage, no tail, just lift and thrust and mathematics. When the engines ignite, the roar isn't the rasp of pistons, but a scream, sharp and metallic. Flames flare through the intakes, painting the snow amber. Technicians shield their faces as the machine begins to move, hovering on its own power for the first time. Walter climbs into the cockpit, the canopy fogging from his breath. Gauges flicker. The air smells of kerosene and fear. The prototype lurches forward, wheels spitting slush. At 200 kilometers per hour, it lifts a single dark crescent carving across a grey sky. For a heartbeat, everyone forgets the war. Even the soldiers loading crates for evacuation pause to watch the thing soar. Silent and impossibly stable, like a shadow unhooked from the ground. But the engines are fragile. One sputters, coughs, smoke. Walter coaxes it down, skimming the runway before the left wheel snaps, spinning the craft sideways in a burst of sparks. He survives. The Ho 229 lies wounded but intact. Its frame of welded steel tubing and wood carbon composite, an early attempt at radar-absorbing material, has proven its strength. Reimar rushes to the wreck, heart pounding not for the war but for the machine's soul. "She flew," he whispers. She really flew. Beyond the airfield, the rumble of tanks grows louder. Allied lines are closing in, and orders come from above. Destroy all prototypes before capture. The brothers refuse. They hide what they can, burn what they must, and send their most advanced plans to a secret depot near Gotha. But the dream can't outrun defeat. By April, American armored divisions of the 9th Army enter the area. Among them is a young sergeant from Illinois named Jack R. Hughes. He's never seen a jet aircraft before. When he steps inside the hangar, past half-buried wings and shattered glass, his flashlight lands on something that steals his breath, a craft with no tail, no propellers, just a sleek grey disk of wings like the bones of a bird from another planet. "Jesus," he mutters. "What the hell is this thing?" No one answers. The war's ghosts are everywhere, in the silence of abandoned tools, in the smell of scorched fuel, in the designs scattered like confessions across the concrete floor. Hughes snaps a photograph. The flash bursts against the metal curve, throwing shadows that look disturbingly alive. He doesn't know it yet, but that photograph will later circulate through the Air Technical Intelligence Command and spark a chain reaction that stretches across decades, from Cold War stealth programs to rumors of Nazi flying saucers. For now, it's just a mystery in a ruined hangar. a machine that shouldn't exist, built by two brothers who refused to accept gravity's rules. The engines cool. Snow falls through the holes in the roof. And somewhere, in the smoking ruins of Germany, Reymar and Walter Horten vanish into the chaos, leaving behind a wing that looks like it came from the future. April the 20th, 1945. Nordhausen, Thuringia. Rain drums. Against the tarps, stretched over crates, marked with the Black Eagle of the Luftwaffe. Inside a makeshift depot carved into an old locomotive factory, engineers from the U.S. Army Air Force's Technical Intelligence Section T2 for short move through the debris with flashlights and clipboards. Their orders are simple. Find anything the Nazis built that shouldn't exist. Captain Harold Watson, a pragmatic Ohio engineer with a pilot's tan, steps through a hangar and stops dead in his tracks. Before him lies something that looks more like a stingray than an aircraft. A broad, crescent-shaped wing, torn in half but unmistakably advanced. He kneels beside its skin and taps it with a knuckle. The sound is dull, fibrous. Wood? He mutters, no. Something else. Nearby, Sergeant Hughes, the same man who had first glimpsed the shape weeks earlier, watches as engineers pull back a tarp to reveal the Ho 229 V3, barely damaged from its capture. Even broken, it radiates menace. Its surface gleams like graphite. Its undercarriage hides twin jet exhausts that seem sculpted for stealth. This ain't no Messerschmitt. Hughes whispers. Watson agrees. He calls in a photographer, who begins snapping glass plate negatives under the harsh glare of a floodlight. The light pours across the wings, perfect symmetry, revealing carbon dust baked into resin. The Hortens attempt to absorb radar waves. The Americans don't yet understand radar stealth, but they recognize genius when they see it. They also find sketches, pages of precise blueprints written in neat, mathematical German, equations describing airflow without drag, lift without fuselage. The title reads, Nerflugel Pure Wing. The concept isn't new. Northrop Aircraft in California had been experimenting with similar designs for years. But the Germans, somehow, had built one that actually flew, a lieutenant scoffs. What's the point of a plane like this now? The war's over. Watson doesn't look up. The war's ending, he says quietly. But something else is starting. That something else is Operation Seahorse, the transfer of captured German technology from Europe to the United States. The Americans are racing the Soviets for every scrap of innovation they can find. Jet engines, V-rockets, guidance systems, even wind tunnel data, and now the flying wing. Over the next weeks, the Ho 229 is dismantled with surgical precision. Technicians cut through its fuselage joints, label every wire, and pack the parts into wooden crates. Every bolt is photographed, every instrument logged. Reymar and Walter Horten are nowhere to be found. Rumors say one fled west, the other hid under a false name. Meanwhile, at the T2 Seconds temporary headquarters in Paris, engineers begin analyzing the photographs. One man, a thin aerodynamic specialist named Major R.C. Jones, stares at the shape for hours. If this thing had better engines, he murmurs, it could outfly anything we've got. He's not exaggerating. Allied tests estimate that, with upgraded turbines, the Horten jet could have reached 970 kilometers per hour, faster than any fighter in the world. More shocking still, radar technicians note how its wide, carbon-infused body and angled leading edges might have deflected radio waves. In theory, it could have approached enemy lines nearly invisible. Invisible. The word lingers in every report. In May, crates containing the Horten wing arrive in Cherbourg, bound for the United States under a new name Operation Seahorse. Exhibit 23. When the Liberty ship Richard J. Gatling sets sail across the Atlantic, its cargo hold is filled not with gold or art, but with the bones of a dream, the last remnants of Nazi Germany's aviation miracle. The Atlantic crossing is rough. Salt air seeps through cracks in the hull, corroding the exposed metal. But the wooden parts survive, wrapped in oilcloth. The U.S. Army doesn't yet realize how valuable the aircraft is. It's just another entry in the mountain of captured technology, clogging depots from Normandy to New Jersey. By summer, the crates reach Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, the beating heart of American aviation research. The technicians there unpack the parts, like archaeologists. One worker recalls, "It didn't look like a plane. It looked like something from a Buck Rogers comic. But when you touched it, you knew it was real and dangerous." Watson stands by as the team lays out the pieces on the hangar floor. The smell of German fuel oil still lingers. He calls in Jack Northrop's men for consultation, though officially, Northrop isn't supposed to be there. They circle the wing in silence. One whispers, "They built our dream." Back in ruined Germany, Reimar Horten hides with his wife near Göttingen, terrified of being arrested as a Nazi engineer. He isn't political. He's an artist who builds with air. The Ho 229 was never meant to bomb, only to glide faster, cleaner, more efficiently than any machine before it. But the war turned beauty into a weapon. When the British finally question him later that year, he explains his idea calmly, almost tenderly. A plane should be one with the wind, not fight it. The tail is unnecessary, a parasite. Remove it, and you remove drag, turbulence, waste. The interrogators note his mild tone, his hands constantly sketching in the air as he speaks. They ask about stealth. He blinks. "We did not think of radar. We thought only of purity." Still, the Allies sense potential. The Americans, the Soviets, and the British all study his equations. Some of his colleagues are taken to the US. Under Operation Paperclip, though Reimar himself is denied, entry considered too much of a dreamer, not practical enough. Instead, he drifts south to Argentina, where Hell spend the next decades designing gliders under endless blue skies, haunted by the ghost of the wing that almost changed history. At Wright Field, the Americans rebuild what they can. The steel frame goes into storage. The plywood skin, blackened and fragile, is reinforced for study. Scientists run radar tests in secrecy. The results astonish them. The plane's curved surface reduces radar return by nearly 20% compared to conventional fighters. 2 decades later, those same principles will resurface in Lockheed's Have Blue and F-117 Nighthawk. But in 1945, the world isn't ready. The Ho 229 is too advanced, too strange, too far ahead of its time. One stormy night in late 1946, a guard at Wright Field writes in his logbook that he heard a metallic groan coming from the storage hangar. Sounded like something settling, he notes, or breathing. The legend of the Nazi flying saucer is already growing. Local papers describe a disc-shaped jet found in a secret hangar. Witnesses exaggerate. Photos leak. Soon, conspiracy theorists will call it Die Glocke's cousin, an alien craft, even a time machine. But to men like Captain Watson and Sergeant Hughes, who saw it firsthand, the truth is stranger than fiction. It wasn't alien. It was human, terrifyingly human. A machine born from war, genius, and desperation. As 1,947 dawns and rumors of unidentified flying objects begin to swirl over Roswell and beyond, the image of the Horten wing lingers in the public imagination, that smooth, tailless arc cutting across the sky like something not meant for this world. At Wright Field, its parts are packed away once more, labeled Horten Ho X V3, and forgotten in the cold dark of a warehouse. Dust gathers on its skin. Decades later, the Smithsonian will open those crates and rediscover the shape that once defied gravity and belief. Outside, snow falls again, just as it did when it first flew over Oranienburg. The dream sleeps, waiting for another age to understand it. Summer, 1933. Bonn, Germany. The air smells of motor oil and hay. Gliders rise and dip above the Rhine. Pale wooden skeletons tugged by the wind. On a hill outside the city, two brothers crouch beside a crude wooden frame, a triangle of canvas and wire. No engine, no propeller. Reimar is 20, thin and serious, with a mind that breaks the world into equations. Walter, 4 years older, has the look of a man who trusts instinct more than numbers. He runs his hands along the leading edge and grins. "It will fly," he says. Reimar shakes his head. "It will want to fly." That's different. They've been obsessed with the idea of pure flight since childhood. No fuselage. No tail. Just one seamless wing. Efficient, beautiful, aerodynamic perfection. To them, aviation isn't engineering. It's philosophy. The sky, they believe, rewards simplicity. Their first glider, the Ho-I, takes shape in the family garden. When it launches off the hillside, it glides farther than any of the local club's machines. The brothers laugh like children chasing a kite, not knowing they've just begun a path that will carry them into the heart of the Third Reich's war machine. By 1934, Germany's National Socialist regime has seized power, and everything that flies now serves one purpose: war. The Hortens join the newly formed Luftwaffe, eager not for battle but for materials, workshops, and access to wind tunnels. Walter becomes a fighter pilot. Reimar remains the designer, scribbling theories by candlelight in barracks notebooks. When the Spanish Civil War erupts, Walter volunteers to fight, flying early prototypes of the Bf 109. He sends letters home describing the violence of aerial dogfights and how fragile aircraft truly are. "You feel the drag pulling you backward," he writes to Reimar. "The tail wobbles like a frightened animal. You can feel inefficiency." Reimar reads those letters and doubles down. He sketches a design that would solve the instability by removing the problem entirely, a craft that is only wing. He presents his glider model to Luftwaffe engineers in Berlin. They laugh at him. "No tail, no control," one says. "You're building a boomerang." But the head of flight testing, General Ernst Udet, isn't laughing. He sees the model's gliding range and the precision of Reimar's calculations. "Give him wood, fabric, and a workshop," Udet orders. "Let's see if the boomerang comes back." By 1937, the brothers complete the Ho-IA, a motorized flying wing powered by two small pusher propellers. It looks like something sketched by Leonardo da Vinci and built by aliens. During its first test at Tempelhof Airfield, Berlin crowds gather, expecting a crash. Instead, the Ho-2 rises smoothly, stable and silent, then banks so gracefully that one officer mutters, "It looks alive." The Hortens are granted resources to continue. Their next step is bolder: combat application. They propose a fighter variant, the Ho-V, capable of outpacing anything in the Luftwaffe. It's approved as an experimental platform, though it remains more curiosity than weapon. Then, war swallows everything. By 1943, Germany bleeds on all fronts. Allied bombers hammer the Reich cities nightly. The Luftwaffe, once invincible, is disintegrating. New fighters, like the Me-262 jet, can't be produced fast enough. In desperation, the Air Ministry issues a radical directive: develop a jet fighter that can outrun bombers and evade radar. The brothers know their moment has come. In a freezing hangar in Göttingen, under dim lamps and with scavenged metal, Reimar sketches the Ho-IX, a twin-engine jet-powered flying wing made mostly of plywood and carbon dust to save weight and resources. "It will be faster than sound," Walter whispers. Tracing the outline, Raymar corrects him. "Not faster, smarter. They work like men possessed. Glue and resin freeze overnight. They warm them over stoves. They test wing shapes with hand-thrown models in snow. Each night, Raymar writes equations on the walls. Each morning, Walter flies captured Allied jets to study intake flow. When a guard jokes, 'You're building a UFO,' Raymar simply smiles. 'If we succeed,' he says, 'you'll call it that too.'" In December 1944, the first prototype takes flight, powered by two BMW 003 engines. It's unstable but astonishingly fast, over 800 kilometers per hour. Observers are stunned. It moves like a thought. One reports, "No tail, no drag." Then, disaster. The engines overheat, the fuel pump fails, the Hoax crashes near Oranienburg, killing test pilot Erwin Ziller. The wreck burns for hours, black smoke rising into snow. Raymar is inconsolable. "The shape was right," he murmurs. "Only the heart was weak." Despite the loss, Goering himself takes notice. The Reichsmarschall, always hungry for miracle weapons, issues an order. "Finish the Horten jet. Give me my 100 zero-point machine." That number 1,000 kilometers per hour becomes an obsession. The brothers receive funding and a production site at Gotha. Engineers refine the jet intakes, widen the landing gear, and reinforce the frame with steel tubing. They name it officially Horten Ho 229. But the war is already collapsing. Resources vanish. Factories bombed. Raymar's dream becomes a ghost, built from scraps. One evening, as Allied bombers rumble far away, the brothers stand outside the hangar, watching sparks fly from welders inside. Walter lights a cigarette. "Do you think anyone will remember us?" he asks. Raymar shrugs. "If it flies, they will. If it doesn't, they'll say it was impossible." He's right on both counts. The Ho 229 will fly, briefly, in a final desperate test in early 45. And it will seem impossible, so much so that, decades later, when American soldiers uncover its remains, they won't believe it was built by men using wood and glue, but for the Hortens, there's no triumph. When Germany collapses that spring, Walter surrenders to British forces. Raymar hides his research, burning what he can't smuggle away. Allied officers interrogate them separately. The British ask Walter if he ever intended the design to evade radar. He laughs. "Radar? We designed it to evade drag. If it fools your radio, that's your problem." Raymar is less defiant. He sits before interrogators and says softly, "We tried to make flight pure. We did not think of war. The shape itself is peace. It moves without waste." One officer later notes in his report, "A visionary without a nation, a genius without a war." After the surrender, the brothers' paths split forever. Walter remains in Germany, later flying cargo planes for the Bundeswehr. Raymar, disillusioned, accepts an invitation to Argentina, one of the few countries still fascinated by experimental aviation. There, under the blinding Patagonian sun, he designs new gliders, hoping to forget the darkness that birthed his masterpiece. But he never does. When asked about the Ho 229 inches interviews years later, his tone is wistful, not proud. "It was a bird born in a storm," he says. "It flew for a moment, then the sky swallowed it. Decades will pass before anyone sees that wing again." In the warehouses of Wright Field, the captured remains of the Horten jet gather dust. Its plywood skin warps. Its carbon shell cracks. Most of the engineers who handled it retire or die, their reports forgotten in filing cabinets marked confidential, yet the myth endures. Veterans tell stories of a Nazi craft that looked like a flying saucer. Children of mechanics swear they saw it move under its own power in the night. Pilots claim radar screens went blank when it was tested. It doesn't matter whether those tales are true. The legend of the Horten Wing has already escaped the hangar. What began as two brothers' dream on a windy German hill will outlive them both, reborn in the stealth bombers that will someday glide silently through the skies, carrying the same eerie grace, the same alien symmetry that once defied an empire's ruin. Autumn 1946. Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio. A cold mist hangs over the tarmac as dawn slides pale light through the hangar doors. Inside, engineers in khaki coveralls gather around a skeletal shape laid out on sawhorses, the Horten Ho 229 V3, half reassembled from its journey across the Atlantic. Its curved plywood ribs and blackened composite skin look both primitive and impossibly modern. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Watson lights a cigarette and exhales into the cold air. "Gentlemen," he says, "we're looking at the future, or at least a version of it." Around him, scientists from the newly formed Air Technical Intelligence Command scribble notes. The words "flying wing," "radar absorbent," "carbon dust" appear on their clipboards. For them, the Horten isn't a trophy, it's a riddle. They begin with measurements. Span, over 16 meters. Frame, steel tubing, lightweight yet rigid. Skin, layered plywood, bonded with resin and impregnated with charcoal powder. That last detail fascinates everyone. Major Robert Lee runs a handheld radar emitter over a panel. The returning signal is faint, almost ghost-like. "Look at that return curve," he mutters. "She's eating the beam." The room goes quiet. "What if the Germans weren't just building a jet?" another engineer says. "What if they were building something invisible?" Watson shakes his head. They didn't have the theory. They stumbled into it. But even he sounds unconvinced. In the following months, the Americans conduct more tests. A mock-up of the Ho 229 seconds shape is built in a wind tunnel. The data shows minimal drag, remarkable stability, and radar reflection levels far lower than any conventional aircraft. It's the first whisper of a new concept. Stealth, though the word itself won't exist for another generation, at the same time, something stranger begins to happen. Reports arrive from across the country, strange lights, moving in formation, saucer-like objects over military bases, unidentified radar blips that vanish mid-flight. In July 1947, a farmer in Roswell, New Mexico, finds metallic debris scattered across his field. Newspapers scream "flying disc, found," before the Army issues a retraction. But within the walls of Wright Field, a handful of engineers share uneasy glances. The timing feels too neat. Just a year earlier, they'd unpacked a German flying wing that looked from certain angles exactly like a disc. "Maybe people are seeing ghosts," one technician jokes. Watson replies, "Maybe the ghosts learned to fly." In 1948, a small, secret team begins work on Project Sign, America's first official investigation into unidentified aerial phenomena. While the public imagines little green men, the men at Wright Field know better. Their early reports include detailed sketches of German prototypes, not just the Ho 229, but circular designs tested at Peenemünde and Prague. The conclusion in one draft, later suppressed, is simple and chilling. If such aircraft were continued post-war under unknown command, they may account for a portion of the so-called flying discs. The notion that remnants of the Nazi engineering corps might have fled with their blueprints to South America, to the Soviet Union, even to hidden mountain bases spreads through military rumor like wildfire. One name comes up repeatedly: Raymar Horten. By now, he's quietly living in Cordoba, Argentina, teaching aerodynamics at an agricultural college. He glides over the pampas in home-built wooden sailplanes, the wind his only companion. When journalists find him, they ask about UFOs. He laughs softly. If people see strange things in the sky, he says, perhaps they are seeing the future catching up. Back in the United States, the captured Ho-229 becomes an obsession. Lockheed engineers under Clarence Kelly Johnson study its curves while designing the U-2 spy plane. Northrop, the American pioneer of flying wings, feels vindicated. His own YB-35 and YB-49 prototypes bear eerie resemblance to the German machine. But while Northrop's wings struggle with instability, the Horten's shape remains mathematically sound. They found harmony in asymmetry, one Lockheed engineer admits. Their wing flexed like a living thing. Still, the Horten project fades from official records. The US Army has more pressing work: jets for Korea, bombers for the Cold War, rockets for the coming space race. The strange crescent of plywood is sealed in crates again and sent to storage officially labeled Exhibit FX-219. Unseen, it gathers dust as the world above it spins toward paranoia. By the mid-1950s, the UFO craze grips America from Washington, D.C. to Seattle. Pilots report saucer-shaped objects that climb too steeply, turn too sharply, and vanish too suddenly to be explained. Newspapers print sketches, smooth, tailless, glowing from below. One photo, taken over Utah in 1952, shows a dark, curved silhouette eerily similar to the Horten's profile. Air Force analysts compare it to known aircraft and quietly note the resemblance. But the public never learns. Behind closed doors, the Project Blue Book Committee debates the same problem Watson faced years earlier. Could a human-made craft evade radar? Could the Nazis have built something still flying, somewhere? An Air Force colonel slams his fist on the table. You really think a couple of Germans in Argentina are buzzing our bases in secret wings? A young engineer replies, "Sir, with respect, maybe they don't need to. Maybe we're the ones doing it now, and we just don't want anyone to know." The colonel goes silent. Meanwhile, Raymar Horten keeps designing gliders. Elegant, silent, pure. His later models, the Horten.XVA and Horten.XVB, adopt organic curves nearly identical to his wartime jet to outsiders. They look serene. To those who know their history, they look haunted. In interviews, Raymar avoids politics but speaks freely of design philosophy. The air loves simplicity, he says. Nature builds wings without tails, without waste. Birds, bats. They teach us balance. Then, after a pause, he adds, "War forced me to rush what should have taken decades. The idea was right. The time was wrong." Walter, still in Germany, rarely speaks publicly. When asked about his brother's work, he simply says, "Raymar chased purity. I chased survival." In 1960, a classified memo circulates at Edwards Air Force Base. It references experimental lifting body aircraft employing blended wing-body geometry and notes that the aerodynamic equations bear strong resemblance to pre-war Horten designs. The signature at the bottom reads, C.L. Johnson Lockheed Advanced Development Projects. The Skunk Works division will go on to design the F-117 Nighthawk decades later, a jet so stealthy that radar barely touches it. Its creators will claim they pioneered the concept. A few will mention that the first known radar-absorbing flying wing was found in a bombed-out hangar in 1945. In the early 70s, Smithsonian curators rediscover the Horten crates during an inventory sweep. When they unseal the boxes, the air smells of old resin and carbon dust. The wings are cracked, the steel joints rusted, but the shape is unmistakable. It's beautiful, one curator whispers. It's wrong. The aircraft is transferred to the National Air and Space Museum's restoration facility, where it still rests today, a skeletal ghost under fluorescent light. Visitors who glimpse it behind protective glass describe an eerie sensation, as if looking at something both ancient and futuristic. Its shadow stretches far beyond its broken body. Every stealth aircraft that follows from the B-2 Spirit to the next-generation drones carries its genetic code. Even the myths it spawned, the flying saucers and alien craft of the Cold War, are echoes of its impossible geometry. The Horten brothers had dreamed of a wing that defied convention. They built it, briefly. In a world collapsing under its own madness, the Americans copied it. The Soviets tried. The rest of humanity spent half a century catching up. At Wright Field, the hangar still stands. Old photographs of its interior show men in uniform standing beside a smooth, tailless wing, eyes squinting against the light. None of them could have guessed that, in building the weapons of tomorrow, they'd also invent the myths of today. Every era gets the machines it deserves. For the Nazis, it was a miracle born of desperation. For America, it became a secret folded into the story of progress. For the world, it became a legend proof that the line between genius and madness, science and superstition, is as thin as a wing slicing through the cold air of history. The Horten wing never flew again. Yet in radar screens, in desert skies, and in the imagination of every witness who saw something impossible shimmer above the horizon, its shadow still flies. Spring, 1978. Smithsonian Garber Restoration Facility, Maryland. The hangar smells of varnish and dust. Under flickering fluorescent lights, museum technician Larry Clemens brushes dirt from a blackened plywood panel the size of a dinner table. It's warped, brittle, scarred by age, yet beneath the surface, faint patterns of hand-laid fiber still glimmer like veins under skin. Clemens doesn't yet know that what his cleaning once terrified Allied intelligence. The tag reads, Horten Ho Tom IX, V3, Germany, 1945. He leans closer, tracing the edge where metal meets wood. The joinery is immaculate, seamless. God, he mutters. They built this thing by hand? An older curator approaches, spectacles fogging from his breath. By hand, he says. And, under bombs, they stare at the strange relic in silence. To them, it's more sculpture than weapon, a remnant from a fever dream, where war and art blurred. Over the next several months, the restoration team documents every inch. When radar technicians from the Air Force visit, curiosity turns to disbelief. The wooden skin, infused with powdered carbon, still absorbs portions of electromagnetic energy even after 30 years. One of them murmurs, "They were decades ahead of us." That he's not wrong. At the same time, across the country, another team at Lockheed's Skunk Works is deep into a classified project called Have Blue, their goal, an aircraft invisible to radar. Engineers calculate radar cross-sections using primitive computers, shaping their prototype with sharp, faceted angles. Yet even as they celebrate each breakthrough, some of them whisper about the Horten. One test pilot, Ben Rich, later recalls in his memoir, we'd seen photographs of a German jet shaped like a manta ray. It looked like the future, built too early. In a sense, that's exactly what it was. The Horten brothers' idea blending lift and body into a single, continuous wing will define the stealth revolution. Every aircraft that seeks invisibility will echo their philosophy. But the irony is cruel. The brothers themselves never saw ascent, never gained recognition. They were ghosts in the design lineage, forgotten names behind billion-dollar secrets. While American engineers reinvent stealth, rumors about the original machine spread through a different kind of network, the UFO community. By the late 1970s, the Cold War has reawakened interest in strange phenomena. Military test sites like Groom Lake in Nevada soon to be mythologized as Area 51 become magnets for speculation. Locals report silent black triangles gliding over the desert at impossible speeds. Newspapers print sketches, sleek, tailless shapes with softly glowing edges. A handful of researchers trace the origins to declassified wartime documents about Project Horten. One amateur historian writes, "The Nazi flying wing didn't die in 1945. It changed uniforms." Conspiracy theorists spin it further. They claim Raymar Horten fled to Argentina with blueprints that later resurfaced in US hands. Some say the Horten wing was tested secretly at White Sands. Others insist it crashed in New Mexico in 1947, mistaken for something extraterrestrial. The legend feeds itself. Every grainy photograph of a disk or triangle in the night sky becomes another echo of the Horten brothers' silhouette, Argentina, 1980. Raymar Horten sits at a wooden desk near Cordoba, sketching gliders while warm wind rattles the shutters. He's older now, silver-haired, his German accent softened by decades under the southern sun. On the wall hangs a photo of him and Walter beside the HOIX prototype, smiling like men who still believed machines could save the world. A reporter from a Buenos Aires aviation magazine visits. He asks about stealth technology, about rumors that American bombers are using his design. Raymar laughs softly. "If that is true," he says, "then perhaps something good came from the madness." He pauses, tapping his pencil against the page. "But I did not build it for war, I built it for beauty." War simply paid for the materials. The reporter presses him. "Do you regret it?" Raymar looks out the window. A hawk glides in slow arcs over the dry hills. "No," he says finally. "I regret that humanity learns only through destruction. The wing was meant to be free." He never patents the concept, never capitalizes on his legacy. When he dies in 1994, few outside aviation circles notice. His obituary in a German newspaper is short, 3 sentences. It calls him a pioneer of tailless flight. No mention of the word stealth. Back in the United States, the 1990s bring revelation. When the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber is unveiled, journalists gasp. Its smooth crescent profile, its buried engines, its silent glide, all eerily familiar. Aviation historians immediately draw parallels to the Horten wing. Didn't the Nazis build something like that? One reporter asks a Pentagon official. The official smiles tightly. "Convergent evolution," he says. "Good ideas often reappear. But among engineers, the debt is well known." Northrop's design team studied wartime German data extensively. In fact, their aerodynamic equations for the B-2's wing structure match Raymar's calculations within decimals. In death, the Horten brothers finally achieve immortality, though under another nation's flag. April 2009. At the Smithsonian's Udvar-Hazy Center in Virginia, the HO-229's restored frame is unveiled to a small invited audience. Its pale grey skin stretches across the massive wingspan, like the fossil of a prehistoric bird. The crowd whispers, half in awe, half in unease. A journalist leans toward a curator and asks, "Why does it look so modern?" The curator smiles faintly. "Because it is." They run their hands along the edge, feeling the cold smoothness of the composite. The information plaque reads simply, "Horten HO-229 V3, world's first jet-powered flying wing, captured 1945. No mention of how it changed everything that came after. No mention of the rumors, the myths, the UFO sightings. Just a static relic under museum light, mute proof that imagination can outlive empires. But to those who know, standing before it feels different. You sense movement, an echo of wind over plywood, of twin-jet engines screaming against history. you realize that this artifact isn't just a weapon. It's a glimpse of an alternate timeline, one where humanity reached forward before it was ready. Even now, the WW2 influence surfaces in unexpected places. Experimental drones mimic its curves. Artists design concept vehicles, inspired by its symmetry. Hollywood recreates it endlessly in films, in video games, in documentaries that still ask the same question: was it human or something else? The truth is simpler and stranger. It was both. A human dream so radical that it looked alien. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, the same hangar that once stored the Horten Wing remains sealed most days. But at night, guards swear they hear echoes, the faint metallic hum of engines long gone, the ghost of air moving over unseen wings. Maybe it's imagination. Or maybe, as one technician wrote in a classified memo decades ago, some designs never die. They simply wait for the world to catch up. The Horten Wing waited half a century. It now flies in every stealth aircraft on Earth. Every rumor of a triangle over the desert. Every whisper of technology too strange to believe. Its story began with two brothers on a German hillside, dreaming of freedom. It ended in museums, myths, and machines that turned those dreams into shadows. But perhaps in that quiet space between history and imagination, the wing is still flying. Summer, 2024, Washington, D.C. Rain drizzles across the polished concrete outside the Stephen F. Udvar Hazy Center, where a line of visitors winds past glass doors. Inside, beneath cool white lights, a massive crescent of pale gray wings lies suspended, like a sleeping creature, the Horten WW2 V3, rebuilt, silent, eternal. Children press their faces to the railing. To them, it looks less like an airplane, and more like something alive. A manta ray, a bird of steel, a ghost. Their parents read the plaque aloud. World's first jet-powered flying wing, designed by Reimar and Walter Horten, Germany, 1944. Most nod politely and move on. But one man lingers, Dr. Lucas Steiner, an aerospace historian from Munich. He studies the curves with quiet reverence. He has spent years tracing the brothers' lineage through archives, diaries, and forgotten blueprints. To him, this machine is not an artifact. It's a prophecy. He pulls a small notebook from his coat and writes, 79 years later, the world still builds in their shadow. That shadow stretches farther than most realize. The modern era of flight stealth drones, blended wing transports, spaceplane prototypes, all echo the same elegant arc, first conceived in a freezing German hangar. Even now, engineers working on hydrogen-fueled aircraft cite Horten principles in design papers. Natural lift, minimal drag, seamless flow, and in a classified laboratory under Nevada's desert sun, new prototypes hum with electricity instead of fire. Their silhouettes, still curved, still tailless, still reminiscent of that long-buried wing. When asked why the design endures, one Lockheed engineer smiles. Because physics doesn't care who drew it first. Yet, the Horten brothers' legacy remains morally complicated, a truth historians wrestle with. They were dreamers, yes, but their dream was paid for by a regime built on terror. Their workshops thrived under the patronage of Hermann Goering. Their materials came from forced labor factories. Genius and guilt, innovation and exploitation bound together in rivets and resin. Dr. Steiner knows this, and it troubles him. During his research in Germany, he discovered Reimar's letters to his wife, written in late 1944. In one, he confesses, "I build in the hope that flight may survive even if we do not." In another, "They will use it for war, but I cannot unlearn beauty." The words haunt him. Can art born from atrocity still be beautiful? Can science, stripped of its context. Ever truly be innocent? Standing beneath the Horten wing, Steiner watches the children again. They aren't thinking of war. They're imagining themselves in the cockpit, soaring silently above the clouds. Perhaps that's the answer, that meaning changes with time, and the sins of the past slowly erode under the winds of progress. Far away, in Cordoba, Argentina, a small museum displays one of Raymar Horten's later gliders. Its shape is smoother, more organic than the war machines that made him famous. Beside it sits a faded photograph. Raymar and his wife, standing beside the Ho-2, smiling. An elderly volunteer explains to visitors that Horten loved birds, especially the black kite, which glides on invisible currents for hours. He studied how they move without tails, she says softly. He said nature was the best engineer. The museum is quiet, modest, almost forgotten, yet the visitors who come there feel something powerful. They touch the glider's wingtip and realize it connects directly to every stealth craft and futuristic design the world now celebrates. The line of progress runs not through countries or ideologies, but through minds that refuse to stop imagining. October 2024, Palmdale, California. On the runway of Plant 42, a black aircraft rolls from its hangar. Cameras flash. The crowd of journalists murmurs. The B-20 Raider, the newest stealth bomber, stretches its endless wings under the desert sun. From a distance, it looks almost identical to the Horten Ho-229, wider, smoother, made from carbon fiber and code instead of plywood and glue. But unmistakably kin. A journalist near the fence whispers, "It's the Horten wing all over again." A Lockheed representative hears her and nods politely. "We prefer to call it heritage," he says. When the bomber lifts off, the sound is barely audible. It climbs higher and higher, a dark crescent vanishing into blue, proof that the shape the brothers imagined in the ruins of war has become the global face of air power. Meanwhile, at the Smithsonian, curators prepare to move the original Ho-229 into a new climate-controlled chamber. Decades of preservation have taken their toll. Its skin is fragile, its ribs delicate. As they lift it with straps and cranes, dust falls from its underside like ash. One young conservator pauses to photograph the detail of the wing's seam. "Look at this," she says to her colleague. "They sanded the wood to a mirror finish before painting it, like they loved it." Her colleague shrugs. "Maybe they did." The conservator looks at the curve one last time before it disappears behind plastic sheeting. "It doesn't look like it belongs to the past," she says. "It looks like it's waiting for the future." Scholars often describe the Horten brothers as the Leonardos of the Luftwaffe artists trapped in an age that demanded weapons instead of wonder. Their flying wing never reached production, never fought in the skies it was built for, yet, in a strange twist of fate, its absence became its immortality. Because it never killed, it could be admired. Because it was unfinished, it could be perfected. And because it was misunderstood, it could become myth. At conferences, aerospace engineers still debate the exact origins of stealth. Some point to Cold War mathematics, others to Soviet plasma theories, but a few often, the quiet ones mention the Horten brothers. They speak of how two young men, with wood, glue, and idealism, touched the edge of physics decades early. In those moments, their names rise again, not as Nazis, not as fugitives, but as pioneers who glimpsed what flight could become. Night falls over Washington. The museum empties. Cleaning crews roll their carts across marble floors. Beneath the quiet lights, the Horten wing glows faintly, its surface absorbing and scattering reflections, just as it once scattered radar beams. Outside, thunder rumbles over the Potomac. For a brief instant, lightning flashes across the glass, illuminating the aircraft's smooth outline against the dark. It looks as if it might take off again. In the darkness, one could almost believe that the spirit of the brothers still lingers, not in ideology, but in the restless human need to create. Raymar, who once said, "The tail is a parasite." Walter, who once risked his life to prove that air could lift a dream. Their fingerprints are hidden in every stealth jet, every unmanned drone, every smooth shadow that crosses the sky tonight. The world they helped shape has gone beyond them. Their wing, once a secret of war, has become a symbol of the eternal chaseman against gravity, time against memory. Maybe that's the final truth of the Horten story. That genius is rarely rewarded, that innovation often blooms in ruin, and that sometimes the most alien thing humanity ever builds is simply its own imagination. As the last museum lights dim, the wing rests under a blanket of silence. Outside, an airliner passes overhead, its navigation lights blinking red and green against the clouds. For a moment, the pattern of those lights casts a crescent shadow across the hangar roof. And somewhere between coincidence and design, the old dream stirs again, the dream of a wing without boundaries, moving through the night, unseen but eternal.